what Senator Nelson and I are doing today is going around the area and talking to various media outlets about the session and where it is and where we're going. And basically it probably boils down to this. We're going to obviously reconvene on Monday. Next week will be a week where we put most of the final touches on most of the bills together, and in some cases there are going to be conference committees. They will wrap up during the course of the week, and my belief at least is we would probably adjourn at some point the following week, and it will just depend whether it's Wednesday or Thursday or whatever. But I do suspect that we're going to be moving out within probably the next 2 weeks or so, and much of that could be spent on conference committees. Yeah, you probably know that the tax committee is in conference committee at this point. They'll be reconvening next week. We'll be bringing the bonding bill forward, and certainly at this point we're waiting for the House, but we're not going to wait too much longer before we bring our bill forward, and so that it's ready to conference up with whatever they might bring forward. After that, it gets more insignificant in terms of some of the issues, some of the bills. We've got some general orders bills left to do, but we can wrap that up, I think, pretty quickly. We may not, frankly, even get to them all. So looking at where we are, but maybe just backing up then half a step, we entered the session as this biennium as the majority 2011. As the chart in back of us points out, we entered with a $6.2 billion deficit. We're now about $1.2 billion to the good. Our mantra, our job, the reason we ran is basically to create jobs and spur the economy. And I think by virtue of the fact that the numbers are what they are, I think it suggests that some good things have happened. And good things have happened certainly in the area of job growth, certainly good things in the area of regulatory reform, and certainly many good things in the area of education and workforce development. So as we go forward, as we're looking at, again, where we are, we've got some heavy work ahead of us, working with the governor on the tax bill. No question that I don't think in anybody's mind he doesn't agree with it all. Senator Ortman and some of the rest of us are going to be negotiating with him on that bill as near possibly as tomorrow. We've got an appointment set up, and we're going to continue to work with the governor going forward to, again, come to as much agreement as we can on all of the various subjects. But again, the big ones left are the tax bill, the bonding bill. After that, we'll certainly be working on the Vikings somewhat next week. Whether or not we can completely finish that is probably in doubt. It's a big undertaking, but we're going to try to advance that a little bit anyway, or at least in addition to what we're already doing. So, Senator Nelson, I don't know if you have any follow-up comments on some of the items that I've talked about or that
Sure.
you want to bring up.
Sure. I think there's a couple of real important pieces in that tax bill that's being conferenced. Certainly getting rid of the marriage penalty. That's a big issue, important for many folks that we have that we comply with the feds there and get rid of the marriage penalty in Minnesota. The governor vetoed that last year. We're hoping he has a different heart on this now. Also, of course, it's really important getting rid of that business property tax. That's something that makes us uncompetitive right out of the chute. Our businesses in the state of Minnesota pay their local property taxes, and then the state of Minnesota comes in and taxes them again, and that money goes directly up to the general fund. And if we're looking at companies coming into Minnesota, combine that business property tax that most states don't have, along with our abnormally high corporate tax as well, makes us very uncompetitive. So we want to buy down that business property tax, at least get the inflator off, because that inflates even though the businesses themselves are suffering. So get that inflator off of there. Another important piece in that tax bill is the angel investor tax credit for Greater Minnesota, and that's really important for our area particularly. And I'm hopeful that the governor looks kindly on that as well. But basically, we need to make our tax climate such that we are competitive for retaining our jobs and having new job providers come here into Minnesota as well. Another issue that Senator Senjem mentioned was the importance of education and the workforce. And it is good that the past year we were able to put new money into our schools, $50 per pupil to the general fund in each year, or $150 over the biennium. That's the largest amount that's been added to the general per pupil formula in a long, long time. New money laser focused on literacy. As a former reading specialist, I know that data is replete that we need to make sure kids are reading on grade level by the end of grade 3, and laser focusing on literacy at the early grades is one way to do that, making sure kids are on grade level at the end of grade 3. Tripling the funding for Reading Corps, highly successful program. We've had that here in Rochester. We just had a report on their results, and it's been phenomenal. So that's a key thing. I will say there's something I'm very disappointed about education, and that was the shift that was part of that compromise with the governor in 2011. When we entered the session, when I entered the legislature, schools received 70% of their money the first year, 30% the next year. And in that compromise with the governor, he required that we move that to a 60% payout in the first year and 40% in the next year. And that causes a cash flow problem with some of our schools. Fortunately not in our area, but in some areas. And so we passed a bill that basically said we'd use our reserves. We've replenished our reserves. And so this piece of legislation basically said we're going to take part of those reserves, about 400 and some million, and use that to repay the schools. Still, there'd be $500 million left in the reserves, more than the governor had in his supplemental budget, more than the legislatures had for years, and the governor vetoed that bill. And I'm very disappointed about that. You know, to his credit, the governor has said, MMB has said that maybe in October or November there might be a shortage of funds, and what if the state had to borrow some funds because our cash reserves were not large enough? And my comment to that would be if it's state spending that's causing borrowing, then we ought to be having the state do the borrowing, not our school districts, not our kids. So I'm disappointed that bill was vetoed, and I think it is really putting burdens on our school students and our schools when really it's a state issue. So I wish he would not have vetoed that bill.
Let me just amplify on that, there is great angst, there is great disappointment. There's no question about it on the governor's veto of the school shift payback. That is money that should have gone back to our school systems. There's no question about it. None of us enjoyed the fact that we had to further shift to a 60-40 ratio, the money going to our schools this year. At this point, we have an opportunity to pay that back, at least to get it to 70-30. We all wanted to do it. We think it's the right thing to do, and the fact that the governor is not allowing us to do this, basically withholding money, in my view, from the schools in Minnesota is deeply disappointing, and I would be highly critical of him for that. I don't think there's any reason why we can't go ahead and do this. We're still going to have $500 million left of available money that will weather many, many storms. And there's no reason, as I said, in my mind, why we shouldn't go forward with this. So again, as Senator Nelson's pointed out, the tax bill, big issues there, marriage penalty, $566,000, or people rather will get in the neighborhood of $111 left or back rather. That maybe doesn't sound like much, but it's $100 that can be spent within our economy, and it ought to be. Beyond that, certainly the statewide business property tax. Moving away from that, albeit $29 million the first year, wrenching up to in the neighborhood of $60 million the second year. But over time, buying down that $742 million statewide business property tax is extremely important to us, and we feel it's going to spur economic development in Minnesota like perhaps nothing else could. From a local perspective, within the same bill, LGA remains constant, steady. In other words, there are not going to be any LGA cuts next year, so cities not need to worry about that. It'll be level, the same, and I think for that we're grateful. But again, I think the story is on the back of the wall here, and that is through a lot of efforts and some hard decisions. We took a $6 billion deficit, and we're in the neighborhood of $1.2 billion to the good, and that's a positive, that's a plus. We've got some opportunities to do something with this money right now, especially in the area of schools, and in my view, we ought to do that.
What's your response to the governor's letter he sent the other day? He was talking about the tax bill and saying he doesn't want to use any of the reserve money, even for buying down some of the statewide property tax or any of that, but he's open to maybe using the health care fund dollars, those extra 1%, from the cap. Are you willing to negotiate on that issue, or?
Well, we sent a letter back. We're willing to negotiate certainly in any area, but the opportunity we have to send back $423 million as opposed to something less than, than maybe 70 million, actually half of 70 million is demonstrably far different. The effect within our school system of sending back 20, 30, 40 million dollars is not going to be especially great, but we've got an opportunity here to pay back our obligations to our schools in Minnesota, and we ought to be doing that.
You're going to give the Vikings another shot, or trying to move that forward? How are you going to do that?
Well, we want to move it out of committee and get it in the tax committee. That's our hope first part of next week. It's in local government committee at this point. We need to find a couple more votes to move it out, and again, that's my task for the rest of this week. The House will be moving it again. They've got a couple of. I think it's moved through a couple of hearings there. It'll be moving through another committee early next week, and so we want to try to match up with that.
So how realistic, do you think it is that something can be done on the Vikings this session?
Well, I think within the span of time that we have, it's going to be really difficult. It's not impossible, but each committee, as it moves through, and it's probably got at least tax committee and finance committee in the Senate left to go through, they're going to be fairly introspective with respect to the bill. They're going to analyze it from the standpoint of the worthiness of the electronic pull tabs to pay the bonds off. So it's going to take a while. It's not impossible. Not going to stand in the way of it happening. But most importantly, we've got a tax bill and a bonding bill to finish up with, and they're going to be the priorities right now. We can just do what we can do, and that's try to get a bill off our floor and at least prepare it for the House, and I'm hopeful that they can move their bill as well, so we have a chance to conference these up and come away with a bonding bill that perhaps the governor can sign.
What's your response to some Democrats that have been saying this is a do-nothing session?
Well, if there is tired and hard-working as all of us have been in the Senate side, I think this year it's certainly not a do-nothing session. We've been working hard. There's a lot of bills that have gone through the pipeline. A lot of bills we haven't even talked about. The tort reform bills, again, the tax bills are huge for us. What we've been running up against, obviously, is a governor that's been, generally speaking, unwilling, I think, to recognize some of our ideas and sign those bills. So that is the frustrating part, and we're hopeful in the next week or so that we can come together on some of this and come forth with, again, a session that's going to be successful not only legislatively but for the citizens of Minnesota.
But I think this chart says a lot, actually, which is to come from a $5 billion hole to a $1 billion surplus without increasing tax rates, I think is not a do-nothing legislature, unless you happen to be of the mindset that we are a grow government legislature or we need to be a spend more legislature. If that's your point of view, if you think government needs to grow more and spend more, then maybe you would say this is a do-nothing legislature. But if you're talking about fiscal responsibility, that's not the case. That's a pretty big lift to take a swing like that, $5 billion in the red to $1 billion to the good. Plus, we have done a lot of good educational pieces as well. Alternative licensure, I already mentioned, focusing on literacy at the early ages, increasing money to our schools, giving our school districts more flexibility. And that's important also as part of jobs. We need to have a well-educated workforce, especially in this part of the state, especially in Rochester, where we're looking at growing 10,000 jobs in the next few years. We need to have an educated workforce to be able to fulfill those jobs. And so it's important that we get those educational reform pieces in play as well. We also have looking at performance for teachers, principals, things that are important to our kids and their education and our jobs and economy.
The other thing I would just say, you know, if you look at this chart and look where we are, I've been in the Senate for 9 years now. I have never seen a legislature turn around a budget deficit like we have. If that's do nothing, then I wonder what do something is, because that is a profound work of effort, work of legislative, I think, not only intent, but certainly effort to make that kind of a shift. And that didn't happen accidentally. It happened because employers in Minnesota had confidence in what we're doing and began to invest. We're seeing tower cranes in Rochester now that we haven't seen for a long time. That's a positive. That means good things are happening, and I think they're happening in some part at least due to the fact that we did not go forward as the governor suggested a year or so ago and tax the socks off people. 4.1% tax increase. That would have been totally counterproductive to what we have going on here.
I think 4.1 billion.
4.1 billion, I'm
is what
sorry.
he was
4.1
proposing.
billion of new taxes. We would not have seen the economic growth we're seeing, in my view, had that been implemented.
So far this session, what do you think are your biggest accomplishments?
Just thinking about it, I think the large part probably will hopefully be the tax bill. I mean, everything happens at the end. And along the way, I mean, we can talk provider tax, we can talk a lot of things which are just huge from the standpoint of overall Senate Republican, House Republican accomplishments. But I think it's all going to come together in this tax bill, and that's going to be the bill that, as we go forward, I think is going to make our mark in terms of this legislative session.
And think how long we've tried to get rid of that provider's tax. That provider tax. I know we were trying to get rid of that back when I was in the House years ago. And so now to see that that's going to be ticking down is important for all, especially for our community, which is very centered around the health industry. And think about it. Think about reducing healthcare costs by 2%. That's what the provider tax, getting rid of the provider tax can do.
Now, that was last session, right?
Yes. Well, last year.
Right, yeah, okay, yeah.
I think I mean, yesterday a report came out for the months of February and March were $100 million above the projected amount of money that was going to come in from the standpoint of working on our surplus. So that's a tremendous positive. I mean, we're $100 million for those 2 months over and above projections. That means a lot, and it's happening under our watch, and I think at some great extent is of our doing, and the doing obviously of the private sector of Minnesota, but I think they recognize the fact that there's some confidence here that they can have in their government. That government, again, is going to work steadfastly on tax policy, on regulatory policy, on things like a good workforce, and I think that gives them confidence from the standpoint of doing what they're doing.
Well, everybody's on the ballot. And of course, with redistricting, we have new districts as well. Many of them didn't change, but some changed quite a bit. And I think that's something, as the House, as you said, is always on every 2 years. It's unusual this time that the Senate is up because we were just elected 2 years ago. But because of redistricting, it's an election year for us too. So it was a short term. But we got a lot done. A short term, and yet turning that budget whole around, and then some of the reforms that we've done. I don't know that we talked about permitting reform. That's a key piece for our job growth and new jobs coming into the state. That's something that's been looked at for a long time. We've got copper mines up north that I've been waiting to get in for 5 years. So getting some streamlining of permitting, those type of things. The governor signed that legislation. alternative licensure and education. So there's a lot that was done in a short term.
And I would just say, we've been busy, you know, with the work at hand, there's no question about this. Just thinking back to that question just a little bit, I'm not sure how many times I've heard the governor say, you guys up for election, I'm not. And I do think to some extent that plays into some of the way he thinks about some of the issues that we bring to him. So if that is the case, that's regrettable, but we're frankly, I think right now too busy to worry a lot about elections. We've got work to do on a session here that we want to bring to a successful conclusion, and it's really all about the next 2 weeks.